evening. The crisis in Iraq is worsening by the minute, and today President Obama, who met with his national security team, ordered the U.S. military to begin flying in humanitarian aid. U.S. airstrikes on the Islamic militant group known as ISIS could be next. ISIS continues to seize territory in Iraq and Syria with the goal of creating an Islamic State. In recent days, its fighters have been sweeping through the north of Iraq, driving minority Christians and Yazidis from their homes. Many Yazidis are now surrounded on a mountaintop without food and water. Today, the White House said the situation is nearing a catastrophe. David Martin is at the Pentagon tonight with the latest. David?
Scott, a Pentagon official said just a short time ago, the effort has begun. Transport planes loaded with pallets of food and water have taken off bound for Iraq, and American warplanes are poised to strike if the president gives the order.
The airdrops are designed to rescue thousands of civilians in imminent danger of dying from thirst and starvation. But at the same time, Islamic militants are advancing on a city where American soldiers and diplomats are based. One option calls for airstrikes to halt the advance of militants who are reported to be just 25 miles from the Kurdish city of Erbil, where some 150 American military advisors plus an unknown number of diplomats have been operating in a city once thought safe from attack. The fighting in northern Iraq has forced civilians to flee their homes, and an estimated 15,000 members of a religious sect known as Yazidis are stranded on a mountain surrounded by militants threatening to kill them if they do not convert to Islam. Airstrikes there would be designed to break the siege and clear the way for more transport planes to airdrop food and water. It would not be the first time the U.S. military has delivered water to the Yazidis. We went to a Yazidi village in 2003 in the heady days after the U.S. invasion of Iraq, when American troops were hailed as liberators. And this is the mountain where they are now stranded. In 2003, American troops used it as an observation post, and all the territory around it was under the command of then little-known Army General David Petraeus and his 101st Airborne Division. Today, like much of Iraq, it has fallen under the control of Islamic militants.
Obama administration officials have been debating for weeks whether to take military action in Iraq, and now these rapid advances by the militant forces have forced the administration's hand.
David Martin at the Pentagon. David, thank you. ISIS fighters belong to the largest branch of Islam, the Sunnis, but theirs is a vicious militant version, committing mass murder among Shiite Muslims and other faiths as they march toward their goal of overthrowing the Iraqi government. Holly Williams has the latest.
ISIS militants are surging across northern Iraq. Today they claim to have captured 15 more towns, a military base and the country's largest dam. Soldiers from Iraq's National Army laid down their guns 2 months ago and ran away. Now the Iraqi government is trying to force ISIS back with airstrikes. The only fighters battling ISIS on the ground in northern Iraq come from the autonomous region of Kurdistan. But now ISIS has won a string of victories over the Kurdish soldiers. In the territory they control, ISIS has carried out public executions and told religious minorities, including Christians, to convert to their brand of Sunni Islam, leave or face death. When we visited the Christian town of Bartella in June, we found it guarded by Captain Firaz Jacob and 600 local militiamen. If the militants come here to this Christian town, what will they do? I don't know, he said, but maybe they'll kill us. ISIS moved in and captured Bartella today, sending thousands more Iraqi Christians fleeing for their lives.
Holly Williams is joining us now. Holly, you've spent a lot of time in the region. How do you imagine the Iraqis would react to airstrikes?
Well, Scott, Iraqis are fighting each other, so as you can imagine, their opinions clash. I asked that question a lot when I was in Iraq in June, and I found that most Kurdish people who benefited from the US invasion of 2003 support American airstrikes. But Sunni Muslims, many of whom support ISIS or at least prefer it to the Iraqi government, tend to be opposed to any kind of American intervention.
Holly Williams reporting tonight from Istanbul. Thank you, Holly. The three-day ceasefire in Gaza expires in just a few hours, and Hamas is threatening to resume firing rockets at Israel as soon as the deadline passes. Israel says it will fire back. Since the fighting broke out 1 month ago, 67 Israelis have been killed, as have more than 1,900 Palestinians, including at least 429 children. We wondered what it's like to grow up in a war zone. We're going to look at this from both sides of the war tonight. Charlie D'Agata is in Tel Aviv, but we'll begin with Clarissa Ward in Gaza. Clarissa?
Good evening, Scott. Well, more children have been killed here in Gaza in the last 2 months than in the past two major conflicts with Israel combined. And aid workers estimate that hundreds of thousands of children have been traumatized.
There aren't many places left to play in Gaza. Playgrounds, schools, the amusement park have been smashed. Nearly a quarter of the Palestinians killed this month were children. Thousands more were injured. At the Shifa hospital, the pediatric ward is still packed. Brothers Mohammed, Omar, and Musab Wahdan were all seriously burned and wounded by shrapnel when the house they were sheltering in was hit. Their mother was killed in the strike. Their relatives have decided not to tell them for now. 5-year-old Musab told us he isn't afraid of the bombs, but he shares the vacant stare of so many here. Doctors say as soon as these children are stable, they will have to be cared for at home. For many, there is no home to go to.
I'm Charlie D'Agata in the Israeli town of Hadera, where 5-year-old Afek and his two little sisters have been away from their home for a month. Their parents, Kobe and Shira Revivo, fled from the Gaza border to northern Israel, trying to dodge Hamas rockets.
I am a refugee. I am completely a refugee.
Last week, a rocket fell in a playground not far from their home. But most Israeli border children have stopped playing outside. They play indoors, never far from bomb shelters.
I can see my daughter, she's afraid from many things. So we understand that this is a side effect of the situation that she lives in.
But Shira says she realizes the situation is much worse in Gaza.
As a mother, what do you think when you see the pictures of children or you hear the news of the children?
Of course I'm sad, but I don't want them to kill my children first.
Shira told us she has no intention of taking her children back home anytime soon, certainly not until they see whether this ceasefire will be extended, Scott. But judging from past history, there's not much optimism.
Charlie D'Agata in Tel Aviv, Clarissa Ward in Gaza City. Thank you both. Now to another important story tonight. In Hawaii, the day began with a magnitude 4.5 earthquake. There were no injuries or damage, but the day will end with the first of 2 hurricanes, a rare double threat. Isel is expected to hit the Big Island overnight. Right behind is Julio, a Category 2, forecast to hit over the weekend. Bagad Shaban is in Hilo. Bagad?
Scott, we are already beginning to feel the effects of the storm's outer bands. Emergency shelters are now open, and the surf here along the coast is picking up. Hurricane Isel is expected to pack 75-mile-per-hour winds. Waves could be 2 stories tall. Stores are stripped of supplies, and streets, usually packed with tourists, are also empty.
Yeah, I'm scared and worried.
Ruben Kasesem has called the Big Island home for 40 years. We met him as he boarded up his grocery store.
Losing the structure and losing whatever I have inside my store is going to be, I'm going to lose my business.
It's been 22 years since a hurricane hit Hawaii. Hurricane Iniki killed 6 and destroyed more than 1,400 homes. A multi-agency meeting was held today to plan for what could be 2 hurricanes in less than 72 hours. Daryl Oliveira is the emergency management director for Hawaii County.
We're preparing for the full spectrum of impact, and that would be everything from power outages, flooding, landslides along our highways.
What's the potential for damage?
We have some subdivisions where the homes are very close to the shoreline and very vulnerable to any kind of surge and surf pickup.
And Scott, the hurricane is expected to hit here during high tide, only increasing the chances of flooding here in Kilo.
The fear of Ebola in affected countries and beyond is palpable. A man in Guinea suspected of having the gruesome disease was left lying in a city street for hours. Passers-by too scared to help, medical resources stretched thin.
Let them come and take him from here, because we are afraid.
More than 930 people have died in the outbreak. The military now helping combat the spread of Ebola in Sierra Leone. Liberian soldiers are clamping down on travelers. No one with a fever allowed in or out of the country. And in Spain, health officials reassuring the public there is little risk of Ebola spreading from an infected priest evacuated from Liberia, now in isolation at a Madrid hospital.
He is stable with fever, and the most important thing is that Father Miguel is not hemorrhaging. This is a sign of a positive prognosis.
The World Health Organization will soon decide if the Ebola outbreak is an international public health emergency, which could initiate a more global response. The CDC is operating on its highest alert level, the first time since the 2009 swine flu pandemic. The agency's director briefed representatives on Capitol Hill.
We, with our partners, have been able to stop every Ebola outbreak to date, and I'm confident that if we do what works, we will stop this one also. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy.
Dr. Thomas Frieden says tried and true infection control methods, diagnosis, isolation, and tracing patient contacts are the best way to end the outbreak.
First, we can stop Ebola. We know how to do it. It will be a long and hard fight, and the situation in Lagos, Nigeria is particularly concerning, but we can stop Ebola. Second, we have to stop it at the source in Africa. That's the only way to get control. And third, that we have to stop it at the source through tried and true means. We do know how to stop Ebola. Meticulous case finding, isolation, and contact tracing and management. We, with our partners, have been able to stop every Ebola outbreak to date, and I'm confident that if we do what works, we will stop this one also. But it won't be quick, and it won't be easy. It requires meticulous attention to detail, because if you leave behind even a single burning ember, it's like a forest fire, it flares back up. One patient not isolated, one patient not diagnosed, one healthcare worker not protected, one contact not traced. Each of those lapses can result in another chain of transmission and another flare of the outbreak.
If there was any one thing that needed to demonstrate a lack of attention of the international community on this crisis, which has now become an epidemic, it was the fact that the international community was comfortable in allowing 2 relief agencies to provide all of the clinical care for the Ebola victims in 3 countries. 2 relief agencies. Samaritan's Purse and Doctors Without Borders. It was not until July the 26th when Kent Brandley and Nancy Wrightbull were confirmed positive that the world sat up and paid attention.
There is no way to count all the people dying of Ebola in the villages and in the remote areas. The cause of death is often unknown, and there exists a lot of suspicion toward Western and government health workers. As a result, information is often withheld from health workers. Advice on safe burial practices or abstaining from eating bats and monkeys is oftentimes met with resistance and even violence against health workers.
Today, a notorious Florida reform school gave up a secret it had kept for 7 decades. At its peak in the 1960s, the Dozier School housed 500 boys under brutal conditions. Researchers are now unearthing unmarked graves on the campus. Vicente Arenas tells us what they found.
This was maybe within a year before he left home.
George Owen Smith was 14 years old when he was sent to the Dozier School for Boys after allegedly wrecking a stolen car. It was 1940. Ovell Smith Krell is his younger sister.
He had only been there a few weeks when my mom hadn't heard from him. He'd sent us a letter and said he was there. She never heard from him again, and she wrote up to the superintendent, and he wrote and said he was missing. He had run away.
But weeks later, the school informed the family that Owen, as he was known, had been found dead and was buried at Dozier. The family never had proof of his death until now. Smith's remains were the first to be identified among the 55 unmarked graves uncovered by a forensic team from the University of South Florida. State records show just 31 graves. Erin Kimmerly leads the project.
I think the fact that we have more remains than names and the fact that there were so many more deaths than what was reported back to the state is problematic. So I think ultimately their deaths are a result of the treatment and what was happening to them there.
Over the years, former students have come forward saying they were physically abused. Some claimed boys were killed. Florida closed the school in 2011.
So maybe this.
Kimberly's team used the remains to build computer models of what the boys might have looked like. DNA was used to confirm George Owen Smith's identity.
After 73 years, I was about to give up. And it's just, it was like a miracle. It is a miracle, really. It is a miracle.
A group of Iranian Assyrians has held a rally in front of the UN office in Tehran over the ISIL atrocities against Iraqi and Syrian Christians. The protesters also condemned the massacre of people in Gaza by Israel. Our correspondent Amir Mehdi Kazemi has filed this report.
Voicing anger over the brutal killings of Christians and other religious groups in Iraq by the Takfiri terrorists of the ISIL. Hundreds of Iranian Assyrians gathered in front of the UN building in Tehran to demand justice and global attention to the plight of Assyrians in Iraq.
They are pretending to be blind, deaf and dumb. If a drop of water falls on the ground in Iran, they'll turn it into an ocean. But they ignore all the brutality that is taking place against our people. Today, the same disasters are being inflicted on the innocent people of Gaza amid silence of the UN Security Council and human rights organizations. We are here to say that if you had spoken out, none of this would have happened.
They come from all walks of life. Members of this small but historic Christian community in Iran are now witnessing their fellow Assyrians being beheaded, tortured and forced to leave their homes by a terrorist group which claims itself to be the new ruler of a part of Iraq and Syria. Demonstrators held placards and chanted slogans calling for practical action against the terrorists.
The barbaric Takfiris killed defenseless women and children. Just recently, they have forced 5,000 Assyrians to flee their home in Mosul city at Nineveh province. Along with other Syrians around the world, we have gathered here today to cry out the innocence of Iraqi Assyrians.
White jackets with an Arabic letter resembling the same sign that ISIL terrorists segregate Iraqi Assyrians were worn by many of the protesters.
We are very worried about the Assyrians and other Christians in Iraq and Syria who are being attacked by ISIL terrorists. It is painful for us as Iranian Christians to see our brothers and sisters in pain while we are leading a good life here in Iran.
Since the terrorists took over the Iraqi city of Mosul, hundreds of Iraqi Assyrians have been brutally murdered and their women and children held as hostages by the Takfiris. Their properties have been confiscated and thousands have been forced to flee a land which they have inhabited for more than 3,000 years.
Condemning the silence by the international community on the cycle of violence that has so far claimed thousands of lives in Iraq, the Iranian Assyrians say that they are still keeping up hope for a day when Iraq would return into its past, to a country where Muslims and Christians live side by side in peace.
Israel's troop pullout from the besieged Gaza Strip, the world is beginning to realize the scale of the damage done to the already impoverished Palestinian enclave. Our correspondent in Gaza, Hala As-Safadi, has spoken to some of the farmers there and describes how the Israeli offensive destroyed Palestinian lands and infrastructures in Gaza.
We're walking right now with a farmer whose land was totally destroyed. As you can see here, his house was also burned right in front of his land. Israel claims that rockets were fired from here, but obviously, as you can see, they bulldozed the entire area, and there is nothing that has to do with any kind of rockets in here. The tomatoes, plants were totally destroyed. He says that this was the only source of income for him, and until now it's all destroyed. As you can see, the water main pipelines were also attacked. The infrastructure was totally destroyed in this land. This room was actually used to keep the fertilizers and the equipment and supplies the farmers need to keep on farming their land. And simply Israel totally destroyed it, not caring for anything. Those used to be greenhouses where Palestinians used to plant their food, to plant their vegetables with very primitive resources. But even this was also a target for the Israeli continuous aggression on Gaza. Farmers until the moment, they're all telling me that this was their land, they farmed it, it was just in front of their house, there was nothing going on in here, but everything seems like a threat to Israel, and every chance or an opportunity that Gazans would have to live should be destroyed by Israel. This is what Israel has been proving since day one of the Israeli aggression on Gaza. So even if there's a ceasefire, what should the ceasefire do to fix all this destruction that has happened to Gaza? Israeli tanks and trucks bulldozed those farms, those lands where people used to farm. Not only did they destroy the lands, but they also destroyed with F-16 war planes the houses of the farmers. So it's not only one misery they have to deal with, but two, they lost their lands, they lost their houses as well. This is the food that the farmers used to feed their animals and their cattle. It was also poisoned now and is no more of any use after the Israeli F-16 rockets has targeted this place, making it of no use at all. As you can see, the place is totally destroyed. The ceiling is already on the ground. It is totally destroyed and it needs to be rebuilt all over again.
The bumpy and dangerous road to Ganjiajai, where an entire village was buried under the mud. A military rescue vehicle trying to reach the area found the way blocked by fresh mudslides. There was no choice but to walk the rest of the way to the village.
It will probably take half a day to get there on foot.
A kilometer from the village, the road was even more badly damaged. No one could get through. Nearby, another rescue team was battling a rapidly rising barrier lake.
If they blow up the barrier, it will send shockwaves through the mountains, so we can only wait.
While they waited, Red Cross personnel from Qingdao arrived.
It's safer here than further ahead. We put up tents here with food supplies.
After several hours, the road was finally cleared enough for people to get through on foot. The village used to be in this valley. Now it's gone. All that remains is debris. Rescuers said they would do everything they could to find survivors, but there's little chance that anyone is still alive.
Elsewhere, it's been over 2 years since deadly violence broke out against Myanmar's Rohingya Muslims. The Myanmarese government has been accused of having a hand in the violence against the minority, who are continuing to suffer from a lack of basic supplies.
One of dozens of refugee camps for Rohingya Muslims in Myanmar. Conditions are dire, especially in the rainy season. Little food is reaching the camps and the government is restricting access to international aid organizations desperate to help.
We are refugees. We lost everything. Why is our government doing this to us? They must really hate us.
A newly born baby is brought out to us. Her mother died yesterday giving birth. She probably would have survived with proper care. Every day, adults and children are dying from the lack of medical care the Myanmar government is refusing to supply. A hospital near the camps, but strange for a hospital, there are no doctors or nurses. While we were at this hospital, a young pregnant woman came. She looked in pain and her family looked in great distress. She was due to give birth, she is due to give birth any day, but she's come to this hospital and there's nobody here to look after her or to help her give birth. A Rohingya couple arrive with their child. They quickly realize there is no one here to help them. The child has a high fever, the mother a nasty infection. I asked them where they would go now. Home, they said. Where else can we go? A school said to be the only one servicing over 1 million Rohingyas in the area. Only a few of the teachers are paid, but there is pride in how the children are dressed and how the school is run. A people struggling to find dignity with such an uncertain future.
I can suggest the futures because we lose all of our dreams, we lose our homes, our hope. So now we are homeless, hopeless. So we have no futures.
On our second day of filming in the area, 3 police officers turned up at our hotel and ordered us to stop filming. The government doesn't want this story getting out.
The Russian government taking aim to put a chokehold on the global food market. Moscow announcing Thursday it would ban imports on almost all food products from Western nations. A move in retaliation for tough financial sanctions imposed on Russia by the U.S. and European Union, a penalty for its support of pro-Russian separatists in Ukraine.
President Putin is denying his own people food.
But Obama administration officials dismissed Putin's new sanctions as trivial to the U.S. Thursday, saying the sanctions will only lead to bare shelves in Russian supermarkets.
So he has a choice to make. Either he can take actions that hurt his own people, or he can use the diplomatic off-ramp that we've always said exists and de-escalate and try to move forward in a different direction here.
In 2013, the U.S. sent just $1.3 billion in agricultural exports to Russia, about a quarter of that in poultry products.
The amount of exports to Russia is a small amount compared to the big picture, so the farmers affected will probably be able to find other markets.
But European farmers might see a bigger hit. Last year, the EU exported nearly $16 billion in agricultural goods to Russia, about 10% of its total food exports. Moscow warned that the food ban could spread to other restrictions, including limits on aircraft, cars, and other industrial products.